potentially upon us, or what I began to call possibility of the second Holocaust in about 2003. Talk about being mocked for telling the truth. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Professor Doron, who's a historian of the early American Republic at Fordham University and a playwright. His political play we all enjoyed last night here, who's a research affiliate here at Yale on the interdisciplinary study of anti-Semitism. He's working on a number of studies, and he's the author of a number of books and plays, and recipient of a number of prestigious awards. So without further ado, Doron.
Can we get the, and can you lower the light? Before I speak, I'd like to acknowledge that the two speakers ahead of me have done more than just scholarly work. They have both bravely taken on some of the most insidious elements and have done so at some personal cost. And I think that we need to acknowledge that both Richard and Alvin have done tremendous work, and I really wanted to say thank you to you guys. Brandeis is probably the last university in the United States where you would expect to find a storm developing over an invitation to the Israeli ambassador. But the university selection of Michael Oren as its 2010 commencement speaker triggered a protest and unleashed an ugly controversy that reverberated through the Jewish community in the United States and abroad. The opposition to Oren can be dismissed as one more meaningless academic theater, similar to the ones that Barack Obama faced at Notre Dame, and John McCain at the New School, Phyllis Schlafly at Washington University in St. Louis, and so many others. Indeed, when all was said and done, Brandeis's outgoing presidents, Yehuda Reinhardt's, never wavered. Oren came, got his honorary degree, and made a speech that was soon forgotten. Fears of protests and disruptions, like the ones that he faced at the University of California, Irvine, did not materialize. The episode is thus secure in the dustbins of mountains that turns into molehills. But there is something more about the controversy. Can you hear me, by the way? There's something more about the controversy that was nevertheless alarming, for it exposed a reality in the Jewish community's academic safe haven. Oren was opposed because in 2009, during Operation Cast Lead, he did reserve service at the IDF spokesman, where he defended the Israeli position. You see it here with CNN's John Roberts. But of course, this was merely a ruse. The opposition originated in a simple fact that Michael Oren was the official representative of the State of Israel. Opponents charged that Oren was too controversial, and I'm quoting, to be a graduation speaker, as if the ideal graduation speaker is a Hallmark card. But that's what the president of the local chapter of J Street declared, and the editorial board of the students' newspaper, The Justice, agreed. Other opponents were less circumspect. Computer science professor Harry Merson, this guy over here, who is, I think his father's Jewish, and he's very fond of declaring that his father is Jewish as he attacks Israel, charged that in honoring an apologist for dropping, quote, white phosphorus on Gaza civilians, the university was compromising its traditional commitment to social justice. Flyers left on the seats in the morning of the commencement accused Oren of defending war crimes in Gaza and mocked his, and I quote, his astounding talent to twist oppression into victory. It is a affair not taking place in Brandeis, then these positions, however abhorrent or absurd, would have hardly merited a mention. We have gotten used to much worse. Fire bombings at Hillel, violent assaults on Zionist activists, and violent assaults on yarmulke wearing students. But it did happen in Brandeis. It happened at America's Jewish-sponsored university. That a student newspaper at Brandeis would consider the Israeli ambassador too controversial shows how far down the slippery slope, sorry Richard, we have fallen. And nothing is more telling of the atmosphere at Brandeis than the arguments put forward by those defending the Oren invitation. This is the highlight of my intellectual life, this slide. Hedy Ben-Atar, which is this girl over here. I'm related to her. She's my daughter. That's why, I mean, this whole conference was worth for that. Okay, Hedy Ben-Atar, who is, my daughter happens to be the student representative of the Board of Trustees. She wrote an editorial in the student newspaper that defended Oren's selection because she said he was a first-class historian who produced brilliant work, and that's what qualified him for the award. My daughter, who is also the president of the Brandeis Zionist Alliance, argued that Oren was invited for his academic achievements, not his political ones. Well, she effectively and objectively, I would say, brilliantly, cornered the opposition to Oren into an anti-free speech position. She said nothing of the symbolic importance of Brandeis standing by Israel at this time. Assuming an even lower profile, the University Hillel avoided taking a stand, even though its director, Larry Sternberg, and it's a very intelligent fellow over here, though not as the other person, believes, and I quote, that denying Oren or any representative of the State of Israel the right to speak at commencement is beyond the line. Still, Sternberg chose the informal route by reaching out to the individual students who wrote the Justice editorial, which of course, by the way, did not make any difference. The Justice editorial, the Justice did not reverse its position that opposed inviting the Israeli ambassador. Sternberg believes that calling out the students who wrote the piece, or people who opposed Oren, calling them out for what really the opposition meant, would have triggered a substantial backlash against Israel supporters on campus, who would be seen as dogmatic, intolerant, and all too quick to label all critics anti-Semites. Now, Sternberg has come under criticism by parents and alumni who wished Hillel had taken, maybe for first time, a more principled stand. But as he sees it, radical anti-Zionism is a minor phenomenon at Brandeis, advocated by a small group of marginal students and faculty. Taking a principled stand, he said, would have been backlash. And now I'm going to give you two slides of what Sternberg wrote to me following a discussion that we had over the matter. And I think that I would like you to, I'm going to read it and you will see it, because I think it's an argument that we need to face. And that's what Sternberg wrote. In this sense, there are no right actions in such matters, only more or less effective ones. And effectiveness itself is subjective. For one parent who called me, the most effective thing Hillel or I could have done would have been to lambast those who led their charge to rescind the invitation to Oren by stating, among other things, that they were self-hating Jews. this parent literally told me that this would be the best thing to promote Jewish identity on campus and to act in support of Israel. He was disappointed that I did not agree with his assessment and at first accused me of being weak. By the end of the 20-minute conversation, he noted that he understood why his approach might not be the best thing for the Jewish identity or for Israel, but he still thought it was the right thing to do because it was honest. And now comes Sternberg's argument. The penchant in the Israel advocacy world to believe that such quote-unquote truth-telling is both necessary and effective is, for me personally, the single greatest obstacle to overcome in our gaining support for Israel among Jews and others. It is ironic that so much is expended in dollars and efforts by so many people, by so many what I'll call the feel-good activity of speaking their truth, which undermines support instead of building it. Now, Sternberg, and I think we have to address this counter-argument. Sternberg and my daughter were obviously correct in reading the political map on campus. But why is it so controversial to make a principled stand and declare that opposition to having Israel's ambassador speak at commencement is unacceptable bigotry at Brandeis, a university that, like the State of Israel, was founded in 1948 by assertive Jews? And I want to make a statement here that my connection to Brandeis, it transcends 3 generations. My mother-in-law was on the first graduating class. Both my wife and I went to Brandeis. My brother-in-law went to Brandeis. 2 of my children went to Brandeis. My daughter still, my son graduated. So our family supported Brandeis with our heart, with our feet, and most painfully with our wallet for the last 6 decades. Okay, so this is not, so what is the source of this fear to come out and say, hey, this is simply unacceptable? And I would like to give 2 examples of 2 university forums, one of faculty and one of students, that have contributed much to creating an atmosphere of intimidation on the Waltham campus. Of course, it would be foolish to attribute radical anti-Zionism in Brandeis to this or that group exclusively. Universities operate in a fluid and interdependent academic world. What students do at San Francisco State or UC Irvine echoes around other campuses. And the same goes for faculty. In fact, faculty are even more homogeneous. Almost all faculty get their news and analysis from the same 5 or 6 sources: BBC, NPR, the New York Review of Books, New York Times, The Guardian. I can add a couple more I'm missing, but that's about, if you look at what people in humanities social sciences read, that's what they read. Those are the sources. People who are really, really avant-garde would occasionally read the Wall Street Journal, though I've never met anybody. Once, two, but it's not something that, nobody ever says, I saw it in academic circles. You never hear someone say, I saw an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal. It's like you wouldn't dare to read. Now, Brandeis has a long professed unique commitment. Brandeis has a long commitment to social justice. And while the university's claim to this tradition does not set it apart from others, inside Brandeis, the assertion continues to resonate. I want to point out that this is actually one of the strangest things about Brandeis. Brandeis' claim to be a unique leader in the field of social justice. It's one of those PR things that you keep on claiming. It's completely fabricated in a sense that Brandeis is so behind any Catholic university in the world. It does more than Brandeis, according to the poor. But when we were took student, my wife and I looked for at campuses together with our daughter. We went to Tufts, and because our daughter wanted to look at Tufts as well, and so we had this wonderfully cute guy who was a tour guide, very, very attractive. He was talking to us about Tufts' commitment to something special that he called Tikkun Olam. And the best thing about it, he even pronounced the Hebrew correctly. You know, and that's what unique to Tav. Anyway, Brandeis, there is a long tradition. Brandeis does have a radical chapter in its past. According to university lore, in the 1960s, half-naked students served LSD laced punch on campus. I'm sorry that I didn't make it. I was too young. When in 1970, Brandeis, two of the top wanted people in the United States for crime by the FBI were two Brandeis students who participated in a politically motivated armed robbery in Waltham, in which they killed a policeman in the name of justice. Brandeis boasts to be the place where one of those two of the most famous radicals in the 1960s, Abby Hoffman, who was also known as the Sandwichman, and Angela Davis, both are Brandeis graduates. And actually, Brandeis is actually where it was the headquarters and the information center for the student strike of 1970 against the invasion of Cambodia that is made famous by the killing at Kent State. So Brandeis does have this sort of radical past, and in some circles the university still rests on these laurels, and some high school activists are therefore attracted to the university for this reason. I'll be much less than 15.
No, you have.
No, I don't want it. I'm a very generous man. Student opposition to Israeli policies has been a common feature of the university's life for decades. But even during the height of the protests over the Lebanon War and the First Intifada, no one really challenged the Jewish right for self-determination. This has changed. In 2008, the University Student Senate refused to pass a resolution commemorating Israel's 60th anniversary. Brandeis Students for Justice in Palestine and its many Muslim students, and by the way, Brandeis, how many Muslims in Brandeis is a controversial question. Some sources say 300, some people say more, or some people say less. The question is, Brandeis is heavily recruiting Muslim communities, including in Palestinian areas, to bring Palestinians to Brandeis. These openly and legitimately, they advocate for the Palestinian cause, but their activities is part of a particularist history and movement. More relevant to Brandeis' tradition of radicalism is a group of progressive students who want to rekindle the activism of the past. Some of them share their ideas on a student website called Innermost Parts, and you have this, this is the innermost parts. This is a play, of course, on Brandeis' seal that was originally says truth onto its innermost parts. Initiated by Israeli activist Sahar Masafi, the blog gives students the opportunity to write about international, local, and personal affairs with a leftist bent. During the Oren controversy, the blog featured a lively conversation about how to receive the invitation to, I quote, a propagandist for a regime that does not respect the human rights. Forum bloggers organized demonstrations and initiated a petition to boycott the commencement should the invitation to Oren not be rescinded. And it's important not to exaggerate the dimensions of student anti-Zionism in Brandeis. For all the hoopla and the noise, demonstrations drew by the accounts of the innermost parts organizers 10 to 20 students. By the way, you know how they excused it? Right-wing conspiracy to prevent students from demonstrating.
And the Boston Globe put a picture of those 10 people up on the front page.
Really? Of course! It was, they tried to take over the president's office. You know, they couldn't get in, the secretary didn't let them, I don't know what they said. I mean, we're talking about 10 people, you know. And some of the opponents were deeply ambivalent. Masafi himself, for example, wrote a moving personal blog, and I have here the quote that he wrote that I think, you know, is very moving. He says, Oren divides me. Please understand, I'm a patriotic Israeli citizen. I love my country. I'm also a proud leftish. And people on the left tend to be pretty harsh on Israel. This contradiction has torn my heart for years already. Now he's about 20, so. But it's okay. He's very sweet. I mean, this is a very sweet thing, you know. Now, I certainly sympathize with Masaki's sentiments. I often feel the same. No one really supports every policy of Israel, or of the Israeli, or for that matter, any government. And even outright hawks, and I can tell you that, even outright hawks cringe when they hear of brutality or abuse. I mean, it's just contrary to what people try to portray them as. What Masaki and his fellow progressive students fail to grasp is that in opposing the invitation for the official representative of the democratically elected government of Israel to speak at the university commencements, they were striking an alliance with those who seek to delegitimize Israel and demonize its people. On the faculty front, the opposition centered with professors subscribing to a list called Concerned People at Brandeis. It's a listserv. In November 2002, these two professors, Robert Lang, he's a guy who's retired long ago, he's from physics, and Gordy Feldman. This Gordy is about 80. Did you ever take a Gordy class?
I believe he's still there.
Right. Yeah, Gordy was old when I was at Brandeis. He's still there. Pardon?
He's a mullet.
Yeah, well, yeah, he's about 80 years old. Gordy Feldman is a sociology, formed a web-based forum in opposition to the Iraq War. So that's the origin of this. The listserv quickly broadened its focus to feature numerous exchanges about a variety of topics. Usually list members share links to leftist pieces in newspapers and magazines, and it remains active. At the moment, list members include 92 subscribers. I am one. I just wanted to. I knew Gordy. I took his class, and I got him to put me on the list quite a while ago. So most of the links about Israel and Palestinian issues are put by 3 or 4 people. Gordy, this computer science professor Merson, and Hindley, and I'll talk to you about him in a second. The most prominent feature of the Israel-related material is the absence of any discrimination between substantial pieces and wild rumblings. Everything and anything that is anti-Israel is kosher. Some of the articles articulated by the list include cutting and pointed exposés of Israeli misconduct, brutality, and even callousness. Others are critical reports from radical Israeli and international organizations. Finally, there are pieces that clearly cross the line between criticism and hate. I have read comparisons of Israel and Nazi Germany, and notes about Jewish control of banks, the media, and Congress. This is an intellectual forum at Brandeis, sponsored by the faculty, shared by the faculty. The blood libel that American boys are being sacrificed for the interests of Israel seems to be an article of faith. Everybody agrees that. Articles about conspiracies against Arabs and Muslims and the poor are featured, and those conspiracies directed from 2 places. It's interesting how these places work together. The West Bank and Wall Street. I never knew there were links between the two, but apparently there are. And AIPAC, cabal, controls American foreign policy. All of those things are common features of those things. Let me give you some other things. The person they hate most is the former President Yehuda Reinhardt. They believe that Reinhardt, he's still president, but he's they believe that Reinhardt came to Brandeis to Zionize the university, to turn it into an option of Israel, and they openly say that, and they attack him constantly, even though 4 years ago, Yehuda Reinhardt, again against opposition, gave an honorary degree to Tony Kushner. Tony Kushner, a man who has, if you read Alvin's fantastic article, if you have not read Alvin's article, you have no right to live. If you Alvin devotes a page to Kushner as a thing. So he gave it to Kushner, but no, he's a designer. Now, another thing interesting about this list that I think we all in the many of the members, in this conference shared similar experiences, and that is the utter absence of tolerance that happens if you dare to challenge. A brave undergraduate dared to join the list and to post articles that were critical of Hamas. They kicked him off the list. They blocked him. I'm going to take 20. Attacks on Jews in Israel are never mentioned. Tolerance, and this is a sentence that I have to footnote a person here and say, well, tolerance is reserved only for the intolerant. Different points of view on the political map are classified as right-wing nuts. Right-wing nuts. Pawns of April, of course. In other words, there's marginalization. I'm just not going to read this. This is just going to be an example of the stuff that they put on the blog. I'm going to move on, just so you can read it yourself. Now, wild and vicious assaults on Zionism on college campuses in Europe and in the United States are hardly news. Nearly every school features anti-Israel events and fairs and invites speakers that rail against Israel and its support in the United States. When Norman Finkelstein was invited to speak at Fordham, a coalition of Muslim and radical students, upset Jewish students approached me and asked what we should do about it. My response was similar to Sternberg's. I said, do nothing. Because a move to cancel the protest would pit us as anti-free speech. And a protest by us would simply draw other people to the to a talk that would have been otherwise attended only by the crazy nuts. But a student responded to me rather despondently, and she said, why is it? And I just remember it so vividly. Why is it that it's you're not allowed to bring a racist speaker or a homophobic speaker to campus, but it's completely okay to bring anti-Semites? And my response to her was, that's the Jewish condition. But you see, it was supposed to be different at Brandeis. I want to point out to you that this is the picture that I didn't do what undergraduate Brandeis did for years. This is a picture of Reinhardt that they all used with Photoshop, and they put stuff in his hands. I didn't put anything in his hands. They put whatever. You can imagine what they put in his hands. I'm not going to go there. I'm not that dirty. It was supposed to be different at Brandeis. The Jewish-sponsored university was a form of American Zionism, a place where, as Brandeis founding president Abraham Sacker put it, we will be hosts at last. It was to be a secular institution of teaching and research sponsored by American Jews. But the Jewish character of the institution was to be sui generis. It operates according to the Jewish calendar, and it accommodates Jewish special needs like kashrut. More importantly, it was supposed to be a place where Jews are treated equally, where they would be able to walk proudly as equals, and where they would not fear standing up to anti-Semites. While Brandeis became one of the most distinguished universities in the United States, it failed to deliver on its promise to Jews. To be sure, the atmosphere in the undergraduate college is unmistakably Jewish. But the university's academic reputation rose. As it rose, it began to move away from its Jewish roots. Racial, geographic, and religious diversity policies, combined with athletic recruitments, discriminate against Jewish applicants. It's much harder to get into Brandeis if you're Jewish than if you're not Jewish. Tours for prospective students that I took, and I took quite some of them, did not mention anything Jewish or Jew. They don't even tell you how many Jews are at Brandeis. But the tour guides and deans do mention a lot, talk a lot about the Red Sox, and I gotta stop.
The man over there.
2 minutes? 2 minutes, I guess? Three, I guess. I'll just,
That means no questions.
Okay, well, that's not, all right. All right, so the 1980s, Brandeis decided to try to move away from its Jewish roots. It formed a committee, board formed a committee headed by Gus Reynes, who actually is one of the heads of this institution. And Gus Reynes formed a committee, and they decided the best policy for Brandeis to move ahead is to de-Judeify. That's they coined the term. It's amazing that Gus Reynes is was there in this committee, and it was a president, Alvin Handler, should really bankrupt the university first they wanted to serve pork and shellfish, and then they should build a gym that really would befit USC rather than Brandeis. And nearly bankrupt. Reinhardt saved the university, but he's moving up, and he's leaving a university where chilling anti-Zionist discourse is an accepted feature of the intellectual landscape. One paragraph. The great scholar of Rosenfeld famously wrote Hannah Arendt that it's in egregious numerous historical and factual errors aside, Eichmann in Jerusalem betrayed a profound absence of Ahavath Yisrael, to which Arendt responded that indeed she had none. She did, however, have plenty of love for the Nazi Heidegger. Modern-day demonizers followed her path. They don't have an emotional connection to Israel or to Jewish history. Arendt blamed the Judenrat for the Holocaust, and they blamed Zionists for all that has gone wrong in the Middle East since 1880. Arendt was uncomfortable with Jewish assertiveness, and modern-day Jewish demonizers of Brandeis and elsewhere share her shame. And until we shed this shame, we will never be hostess last. Thank you.
Well, dear people who have stayed, these were all extraordinary presentations. We have almost run out of time. Is there time for a group discussion? Not even one more? Okay, so then this is a discussion that you must continue in your lives as you go forth. And remain connected. Just, thank you.
Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, sorry for shortening your break for another 30 seconds, but please, oh, no break, okay, so I apologize even more. We have come across what we find a couple of shortcomings in the discussions, and we'd like to lay out our arguments in a little leaflet that will be distributed to you now. And if any of you still have the energy, we are very open to a debate as soon as this whole thing is over, and we would be very happy to get your comments or any of your thoughts. Thank you. It's on the
I can go back and
Okay, we're going to start the next session. And I'd be grateful you take your seats because David Feldman is making a presentation. He hasn't spoken yet and he has to catch a plane. Please.
Ready?
We're going to have a discussion on aspects of research on anti-Semitism, and I thought it would be a good idea for the scholars who are running research centers around the world to participate. We're down to 3, the others have had to leave. I'm going to introduce David Feldman first. David is a historian at Birbeck College at the University of London, and he's the first director of the Paris Research Center on Anti-Semitism at Birbeck College, and he'll go first and discuss his ideas, and then Alvin Rosenfeld, who's running the Research Center on Anti-Semitism at Yale University, and and I'll make some brief comments as well. So David, please.
My watch is broken, so I'm not getting this out because I'm going to make a phone call in my time, but because I'll try to keep to the time to a degree. I want to thank Charles, first of all, for organising a hugely successful conference and hugely stimulating, both in the lecture halls and seminar rooms and outside of it. Much, although by no means all, of the conference has focused on an easily and clearly identifiable anti-Semitism, a mix of Islamist-inspired hatred and imported conspiracy theory that has generated a discourse of anti-Semitism that imagines a region, or at times a world, rid of Jews. This is arresting, alarming, and it demands our attention, and rightly it has received our attention, along with those who would prefer to turn a blind eye to this. However, there is a problem, and this problem was never greater, I think, than in the session we've just heard. And the problem is this: for those of us who want to speak out against the occupation, not as it was referred to earlier today as the alleged occupation, but against the occupation, and what it inevitably does to an occupying polity and society. Those who do so have had their motives excoriated and traduced, and we've been told how we give comfort to the anti-Semites. And there clearly is a political problem here. But I'm left with the feeling that it remains needful to be able to speak out, both against the occupation and against human rights abuses, whether they take place on one side of the dispute or the other, and to speak out at the same time against anti-Semitism. And I think too many of the papers at this conference, not least the papers in this last session, have made it very hard to find a space in which to do that. I want to say one other thing, which I wasn't going to say, but I feel bound to for reasons that you will understand. Most of the people who were attacked in Alvin's presentation are well able to defend themselves. However, Tony Judt is not. It so happens that I knew Tony Judt, and he was kind to me a long time ago in Cambridge when I embarked on doing a thesis on Jewish immigration to London. He took me to see his 90-year-old father to interview him. I think one has to do him the honour of, and his memory the honour, because whatever one thinks of his arguments, he is a significant intellectual. One has to do him the honour of engaging with his arguments and not of condemning them through personal assassination, accusing him of narcissism. I want to raise some questions about how we approach the subject, the problem of anti-Semitism. We've been presented with compelling evidence of jihadist, Islamist, murderous rhetoric. And of course, we cannot but receive this and understand it in the long shadow cast by the destruction of so much of European Jewry in the Second World War. There is a school of thought which is sometimes expressed in the literature at this conference that suggests that anti-Semitism is always murderous, or potentially so. And alas, too often it has been. But historically, it seems to me that that's not the case. Too much is left out. The anti-Semitism of quotidian daily life, suffered by Jews in the Second Reich, for example, did not presage the enormities of the Third Reich. In short, the social history of anti-Semitism is something you could hear more about. Indeed, we need to explore further what is the relationship between anti-Semitism in daily life, as we encounter it in daily life, and anti-Semitism in politics. What is the connection between speech acts and stereotypes and social mobilization? Industrial genocidal acts are not the same thing as the violent, dreadful retribution of neighbours. And we need to be able to make analytical distinctions here if we are to understand the awful phenomenon that we're dealing with. The term anti-Semitism captures all of these phenomena, but in doing so, it tends to flatten them. And in particular, it flattens them when conjoined with metaphors drawn from science or science fiction. Ideas, words like virus or morph, only increase this tendency. It gives a sense that one form of anti-Semitism has the capacity to transform at any moment, under propitious conditions, into another. And yet does it. It seems to me that the metaphor stands in for an inquiry that has to be undertaken. I want to speak briefly about the second problem with the term anti-Semitism, which has come out through some of our discussions. Anti-Semitism is often used in very different ways. In particular, it's sometimes used to refer to an ideology, to a set of intended meanings. And we've heard this in many papers. On the other hand, anti-Semitism has often also been referred to as a set of outcomes, divorced from intentions. We've often heard that people in human rights organizations, well, some of them are motivated by anti-Semitism, we're told, but many of them, we've been told, are well motivated. But the sum total of their actions at the United Nations and NGOs and elsewhere is anti-Semitic. So the anti-Semitic outcome is divorced from the intention. It seems to me to be no wonder that there is disagreement among academics and out in the world over what is and what is not anti-Semitism when the term is used in such varied ways. In other fields, in other related fields, they have a slightly larger vocabulary. I'm sure not a perfect vocabulary, but if we were to engage with the field of racial studies, for example, the distinction between racism on the one hand and institutional racism captures this distinction between intended meaning and outcome. Third, and also I hope briefly, I think we have to confront whether anti-Semitism is a prejudice or is a reasoned discourse, which isn't to say that it is reason, but it is reason as others find it. The emphasis within scholars of anti-Semitism is to discuss it as prejudice, as a failure to reason. But I think here we have to confront the problem or the issue of relativism. Not relativism as a totalizing philosophy or as a political position, but as an intellectual strategy. To many scholars in the humanities, I have to report that parts of this conference will look like the conference that time forgot. If we take witchcraft persecution, Norman Cohn, who had a lot to say about anti-Semitism, also wrote about witchcraft persecution. And he too saw witchcraft persecution in the 16th and 17th centuries as a form of prejudice, a failure to reason. Contrast that with the ways in which anthropologists and historians now treat witchcraft. They treat it by trying to understand the forms, why it made sense to people at the time. They try to recover the reasons and purposes behind witchcraft persecution. Not to justify it, but to understand it as a form of reason which made sense of the world and not as a failure. And indeed, some scholars of anti-Semitism have employed precisely this strategy. I think, for example, of the path-breaking work of Shulamit Volkov. I think we have to engage with this. I think we have to engage with this if we want the academy in the humanities to take us seriously. And I think, I'm not saying that we necessarily have to reproduce those forms of relativism. I don't have a manifesto here. But I think that those of us who don't want to reproduce it need to engage with it, because otherwise we will be ignored. Lastly, that you'll be pleased to hear, I want to pick up on something which I think was very illuminating in Dina Porat's comments. Dina Porat spoke about the reasons why anti-Zionism has such mobilizing effect in the political world. And she spoke about the way in which it combines anti-globalization, anti-capitalism, anti-Americanism, and third worldism. And David Hirsch, in his seminar, spoke about the way in which anti-Zionism becomes a symbolic issue, becomes a site of what he called moral panic after the 1960s sociologist Stan Cohen. This again is a challenge for us, and it's a challenge because it suggests that Jews are not at the center necessarily, are not always at the center of the anti-Semites' worldview. That anti-Semitism arises as a second-order effect of another position. And too often, I think, when we study anti-Semitism, we put the Jew at the center of the worldview of our persecutor. But that might not be the case. So I offer this as food for thought. I didn't mean to sound quite so self-serving. So in conclusion, I believe at this conference we've made an important start. There is more to do, and I look forward to an occasion when we and others can meet again and continue with that work.
Professor Alvin Rosenfeld.
David, you began your remarks by looking in my direction and offering a pretty sharp critique of what you believe you heard me say, you'll understand that I feel we need to look in your direction and critique your critique. I have no problem, personally or as a scholar, with you speaking out against Israeli policies that you object to. And there was nothing whatsoever in my remarks today that was meant to suggest that you or other critics of Israeli policy or Israeli action have no right to do that. So I don't know what you heard me say to bring forth your surprising remarks, which I found objectionable, by the way. It's not really in keeping with the format of this kind of conference for one colleague to take another colleague to task, particularly for remarks he never said at such a closing session. If, on the other hand, you and your colleagues who oppose Israeli policies begin to compare those policies to apartheid South Africa or Nazi Germany, you will then, I'm sure you agree, have crossed an impermissible line. And at that point, and only at that point, will you hear from critics like me and others who simply find that unpardonable. Would you like to say anything in reply to what I just said?
I think what I would like to say is that in those parts of my remarks, I didn't actually, the parts of my remarks which were directed especially at you, Alvin, concerned Tony Judd. The other remarks were really aimed at, directed at the accumulative effect of papers that that connected critics of Israeli policy with people who crossed that line. I think we agree about that line. So I have no problem. I have no problem with that. And indeed, some people have been careful to say it is possible to articulate legitimate criticism of Israel. What I was expressing was a sense that the political space in which to express that opinion was becoming very narrow indeed.
We occupy the spaces we occupy as best we can, and so long as we can support our positions intellectually, there's no reason not to continue to speak. But one must really be prepared to defend one's position intellectually. In that regard, I won't take back a word of what I had to say about Tony Judd. He was your friend, I never met him. So it's not ad hominem.
He was an acquaintance more than a friend, that he had been kind
right
to me, and it's not, and my feeling there, and your points about this being an academic occasion are extremely well taken. And it seems to me that the point about an academic occasion is that one needs to engage with the arguments. And I think that the strategy of dismissing the view in psychological terms, it might be right, it might be wrong, but it doesn't engage with the argument. And I think we are under an obligation in the academy to do that.
I agree, and I've written about Tony Judd in just the terms that you suggested. Tony Judd was a powerful scholar in terms of his studies of French intellectual history and his last book, post-war. Otherwise, Tony Judd was an anti-Israel polemicist. And in that respect, he himself did not argue in academic terms whatsoever. And if you read Tony Judd, I'm sure you have, carefully, the tonal qualities of Tony Judd's voice, whenever he spoke about Israel, conveyed a bitterness, an anger, a hostility that has nothing to do with intellectual argument whatsoever, but has to do with passion. And his passions towards Israel were very negative. And what I did with Tony Judd was expose him by quoting his own words. Yeah? So, now, I'm not sure what else I'm supposed to tell you. Because I didn't even know there was going to be this session until I saw the program and saw that my name was listed as a speaker. How much time do I have? 3 to 5 minutes. We're living in a difficult time. The difficult time is likely to become worse. I personally don't think we're prepared to understand the time we're living in. There are almost no, despite the fact that very large numbers of people at this conference, which is heartening, there are almost no trained scholars in anti-Semitism anywhere at American universities. If I had to recommend to one of my great undergraduate students a mentor at an American university where he or she might do PhD work with focus on anti-Semitism, there's almost no one to whom I could send such a student. There are lots and lots of us who have devoted years of study to the Holocaust. But otherwise, anti-Semitism is an understudied phenomenon in the American Academy. It's an understudied phenomenon in Israel as well. My colleague Dina Barak, if she were here, would tell you the same. In Germany, for many years, there has been a serious research center in Berlin, and as I can hear from listening to some of my younger German colleagues here today, it's heartening to learn that there are German scholars doing this work. But we're only at the very beginning of any kind of serious research effort to engage post-Holocaust anti-Semitism. Not many people thought there would be a serious need, in fact, to deal with such a phenomenon as post-Holocaust anti-Semitism. But we're living in a time where such anti-Semitism has become resurgent. It has a good deal of energy behind it. This conference has certainly made a contribution to help understand some of it, but much more work needs to be done. The institute that Charles Small, to his credit, has established at Yale was, until 6 months ago, the only institute at an American college or university with a research focus, North America, with a research focus on anti-Semitism. A second such institute has recently been established at my own university. David is heading up such an institute in England. There is a long-standing institute in Berlin, but it doesn't deal, at least it doesn't deal well, with recent anti-Semitism. And that's, and 2 institutes in Israel, Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. That's it. All of which tells me we're just at the very beginning of work that needs to be done. You've been witness in the last few days to the beginnings of that work, and we all applaud you, Charles, for your efforts in doing this. It takes years and years for scholars to train younger scholars to become competent and capable in any field. Meanwhile, however, anti-Semitism is proceeding apace. I personally don't think we're prepared to deal with it effectively. There will be more conferences, there will contribution. Hopefully it will be of some help, but I myself am rather gloomy when I look ahead because I fear we're in for some very difficult times. Academic scholars can make kinds of contributions to that. There are not many of us. We'll see what